Brazil has overtaken the UK as the country with the second highest number of coronavirus deaths. Only the US has recorded a higher toll. The Health Ministry announced that Brazil recorded 909 new deaths on Thursday, taking their total to 41,828, surpassing the UK's tally of 41,566. The World Health Organization says the situation in Brazil is concerning, with some intensive care units close to reaching capacity. Katie Watson sent this report from Sao Paulo.
Another COVID call-out in Brazil's biggest city and the epicenter of the pandemic. The traffic's lighter these days because of quarantine, but this is still a city of 22 million, and the roads are as bad as ever. The team's attending a woman in her 90s with Covid-19. 70% of their call-outs are now related to the virus. She'd been unconscious and struggling to breathe, so the family made the call. In these uncertain times, people just don't know if this might be the final goodbye. The patients who make it to hospital are, in a sense, the lucky ones. The team says 3 times as many people are dying at home compared to life before the pandemic.
When
the pandemic started, all we were doing was registering deaths at home. People went to sleep and never woke up. They didn't even have a chance.
Putting on protective gear and the continuous cleaning of their ambulance slows them down, but they're not taking any risks. A colleague many in the force looked up to passed away from Covid-19 in April. They know many won't survive this pandemic.
This is a critical situation, but as we say every time, we only believe when the number becomes a face. That's the time that we believe in the disease, because it's an invisible disease.
In this poor neighborhood in eastern Sao Paulo, one of the worst hit areas of the city, the virus is all too visible. Antonio and Kelly are 2 of the faces behind the numbers, dad and daughter. They lived together and last week died together. Admitted to hospital the same day, together in intensive care, then passed away within a day of each other. We think he knew, says Marcos, his grandson. He told us he'd rather die than bury his daughter. While the family mourns Antonio and Kelly, cities like Sao Paulo and Rio are starting to reopen. This despite the ever-rising death toll.
Brazil has hit yet another grim milestone, but these deaths aren't serving as a wake-up call. Far from it. Jair Bolsonaro continues to downplay the virus. And for a man who's never respected social distancing or isolation, ironically, he's becoming more and more isolated every single day.
Francis also feels isolated. He's not hugged his son Arthur for more than 2 months. Such is his fear of passing the virus on. This has to make do for now.
Do you want to be with me?
Yes.
Dad love you.
You também.
Miss you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo.
For more reaction on Brazil's grim milestone, I spoke with our correspondent Camilla Motta in Sao Paulo.
It doesn't come as a surprise, and what's worrying now is that different states are starting to reopen the economy, even though Brazil hasn't reached the peak yet. Brazil is a big country with different outbreaks in the territory, so in some states we can actually see that the curve of infection has been flattening over the past weeks. In others, health authorities were able to increase healthcare capacity, make more ICU beds available, so the situation is more comfortable. But what experts argue is that when you put so much people back on the streets at the same time and you don't have enough testing for everyone, the situation could deteriorate quite fast.
We know that President Bolsonaro has been more worried about the economy, prioritising that as opposed to people being in lockdown. What about the Brazilian people, though? How much support do they have and how much fear do they have now?
Bolsonaro's dismissive comments about the pandemic usually face furious backlash. Brazilians in general are in favor of social distancing and quarantine measures, even though they complain about the economic side effects. But Bolsonaro still counts with this loyal and loud group of supporters, around 30% of the constituents who go out on the streets to support him and to pressure state governors to reopen.
So do we know what the plan is now as the numbers continue to rise?
Well, state governors say that they will keep watching the figures as weeks go by, and if things start to deteriorate, then they will re-implement isolation and quarantine measures.
And what about pressures on the health service? Meanwhile, we know that some intensive care units are at breaking point.
They are. In those states, quarantine measures are still on foot. Here in Sao Paulo, the numbers, the system was close to collapse a few weeks ago. But now, as I said, local authorities were able to increase the healthcare system capacity. So ICU occupancy rates, for example, are around 80% right now. So they consider the situation quite comfortable. But as I said, experts warn that the situation could deteriorate quite fast.